The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the weathered building that served as Belmont's general store, and Lydia Harwell pressed her gloved hand against the scarred side of her face, a habit she had developed over the past 3 years that brought her no comfort, but had become as natural as breathing. The July heat of Nevada Territory in 1873 was nothing like the humid summers she had endured in Pennsylvania, and as she stepped down from the coach, the dry air seemed to pull the moisture from her lungs. The driver handed down her single trunk, tipping his hat without quite meeting her eyes, and she knew he had seen the scars during their long journey from Carson City. Everyone always saw them eventually. Belmont was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of weathered buildings clinging to the dusty hillside like stubborn weeds. The silver mines that had once brought prosperity were already beginning to play out, and the town had the hollow feeling of a place that knew its best days were behind it. But Lydia had not come seeking prosperity or even comfort. She had come because a man named Pierce Vaughn had placed an advertisement for a wife, and she had answered it with a letter that was honest about everything except the scars that marked her as damaged goods. She stood on the wooden sidewalk with her trunk at her feet, searching the sparse crowd for a man who might be looking for her. Her letter to Pierce had arrived in Belmont 6 weeks ago, and his response had been brief but kind. He had agreed to marry her, asked her to come as soon as she was able, and promised to meet her when the stage arrived on the 15th of July. She had memorized every word of his short letter, searching for clues about what kind of man would agree to marry a woman he had never seen. A tall figure separated itself from the shadow of the livery stable across the street, and Lydia felt her heart begin to hammer against her ribs. The man was lean and weathered, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. He wore dusty work clothes and a hat that had seen better years, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in his own skin. As he drew closer, she could see that his eyes were a startling blue, lighter than the washed-out Nevada sky. "Miss Harwell." His voice was deeper than she had expected, rough around the edges but not unkind. "Yes." Her own voice came out barely above a whisper, and she cleared her throat, lifting her chin slightly. "Lydia Harwell, you must be Mr. Vaughn. Pierce." He stopped a few feet away from her, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the way his gaze traveled over her face without flinching. "Just Pierce. Nobody around here bothers much with Mr." She had turned her head slightly when he approached, an automatic response to present her unmarred left side, but she forced herself to face him directly now. Better to have it done with, to see the disappointment or revulsion that would inevitably cloud his expression. The scars ran from her right temple down across her cheek to her jaw, a network of puckered, discolored skin that no amount of powder could hide. The fire that had destroyed her family's home had taken her parents and her younger brother, and it had marked her in a way that ensured she would never forget. Pierce's eyes traced the scars slowly, deliberately, and she braced herself for the reaction she had seen so many times before. Men who had seemed interested suddenly remembered pressing business elsewhere. Women who had been friendly found reasons to avoid her. Children stared until their mothers pulled them away with whispered admonishments. But Pierce simply nodded, as if she had passed some sort of inspection, and reached down to pick up her trunk. "You're beautiful to me," he said quietly, and the words were so unexpected that she almost missed them. "Welcome to Belmont, Lydia." Her throat tightened, and she blinked rapidly against the sudden sting of tears. No one had called her beautiful since before the fire. No one had looked at her the way Pierce was looking at her now, as if the scars were simply a part of her face and not the defining feature that made her unworthy of love or kindness. "Thank you," she managed, and the words felt inadequate for the gift he had just given her. He hefted her trunk onto his shoulder with practiced ease. "My place is about 2 miles out of town. I've got a wagon waiting. Unless you need to rest first, get something to eat." She shook her head, suddenly desperate to be away from the curious stares of the townspeople who had begun to gather. "I would prefer to go to your home if that is acceptable." "Our home," he corrected gently, and led her toward a wagon hitched in front of the saloon. The ride out of town was quiet, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Lydia studied Pierce from the corner of her eye, trying to reconcile the reality of the man beside her with the image she had built in her mind during the long journey west. He was older than she had expected, probably in his early 30s, with the kind of quiet strength that came from hard physical work and harder life lessons. His hands on the reins were scarred and calloused, and there was a watchfulness in the way he scanned the landscape that spoke of ingrained caution. "How old are you?" she asked suddenly, then flushed at her own boldness. "I apologize. That was rude." 33. He glanced at her with something that might have been amusement. "You? 22. He nodded as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "You wrote that your family was gone, the fire that caused those scars." The directness of the question caught her off guard, but there was something refreshing about it too. No dancing around the subject, no polite pretense that the scars did not exist. "Yes, 3 years ago. I was staying with my aunt afterward, but she passed last winter. Her children made it clear I was not welcome to remain." "Their loss," Pierce said simply. The landscape around them was harsh and beautiful in a way that Pennsylvania had never been. Rocky hills studded with sagebrush and the occasional juniper tree, the sky so blue and endless it made her feel insignificant and liberated all at once. In the distance, she could see mountains, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. "It is very different from what I am used to," she said softly. "I expect so. Nevada's not kind to those who are not willing to be stubborn." He guided the wagon around a rocky outcropping. "But it is honest, at least. What you see is what you get." She considered this, watching the way the sunlight played across the landscape, revealing rather than concealing. "I think I prefer honesty." "Good." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I should probably tell you some things before we get to the ranch, so you know what you are getting into." Her stomach tightened with apprehension, but she kept her voice steady. "All right. I have a small spread, about 200 acres with decent grazing, enough cattle to make a living if I am careful and the winter is not too harsh. The house is nothing fancy, just 4 rooms, but it is solid. I built it myself 5 years ago." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I am not a rich man, Lydia. I can provide for you, keep you safe and fed, but there will not be luxuries." "I did not come seeking luxuries," she said quietly. "I know, but I wanted you to understand." He shifted on the wagon seat and she sensed there was more he was struggling to say. "I was married before. Sarah. She died 4 years ago giving birth to our daughter. The baby died too." The pain in his voice was old but not healed, and Lydia felt an unexpected surge of sympathy. "I am so sorry. It is why I waited so long to look for another wife. Was not sure I wanted to risk it again." He met her eyes briefly. "But a ranch is hard work for one person, and the house has been too quiet for too long. When I placed that advertisement, I told myself I was looking for help more than anything else. Someone to share the burden." "And now?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the creak of the wagon wheels. "Now I am thinking maybe I was lying to myself about what I really needed." He looked at her again, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that made her heart skip. "I read your letter a dozen times, Lydia. You wrote about wanting a fresh start, about needing a place where the past did not define you. I understood that. More than you might think." She absorbed this in silence, watching the way his hands held the reins with gentle firmness. "What else should I know? I am not much for pretty words or grand gestures. I am quiet by nature, and I have been alone long enough that my habits are probably set in stone. I get up before dawn and I work until dark most days. I do not drink to excess and I do not gamble, but I am not a church-going man either." He paused. "And I will not lie to you or mistreat you. That is the best promise I can make." "That is more than many women receive," Lydia said softly. "What do you expect of me? Honesty, partnership. I am not looking for a servant, Lydia. I am looking for a wife, someone to build a life with if we can." He guided the wagon through a shallow creek, the water splashing against the wheels. "And I do not expect anything in the marriage bed until you are ready. We can take our time with that part of things. Get to know each other first." The relief that flooded through her was so intense it made her dizzy. She had been dreading this conversation, fearing that he would expect immediate intimacy with a woman he barely knew. "Thank you. That means more to me than you might realize. I can imagine." His voice was gentle. "Sarah and I were childhood friends before we married. I knew her my whole life. Seems wrong to expect that same kind of connection with someone I just met, no matter what the law says about marriage rights." The ranch came into view as they crested a small rise, and Lydia felt her breath catch. It was modest, as Pierce had warned, but there was something appealing about the sturdy log house nestled in a small valley with a creek running through it. Outbuildings clustered nearby, a barn and what looked like a chicken coop and a smokehouse. Cattle dotted the hillsides, moving slowly in the afternoon heat. "It is lovely," she said, and meant it. Pierce looked at her with obvious surprise. "Most women from back east would call it primitive." "Most women from back east have not lost everything and had to rebuild from nothing," Lydia replied. "I know the value of solid walls and a roof that does not leak. The rest is just decoration." Something shifted in Pierce's expression, a softening that made him look younger. "I think we might do all right together, Lydia Harwell." "I hope so, Pierce Vaughn." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down, then came around to help her descend. His hands on her waist were impersonal but steady, and he released her as soon as her feet touched the ground. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant toward evening, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "Let me show you around," he said, reaching for her trunk. The inside of the house was as plain as he had promised, but it was clean and well maintained. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a sturdy table with 4 chairs in the center. 2 doors led off to what she assumed were bedrooms, and a ladder in the corner climbed to what looked like a loft space. "That is my room," Pierce said, nodding toward the door on the left. "The other one is yours. It has a bed and a dresser, not much else, but you can fix it up however you like." He set her trunk down inside the doorway. "Loft is just storage right now, but if we end up needing more space later, it could be finished into another room." Lydia walked slowly around the main room, taking in the details. A shelf of well-worn books near the fireplace. Cooking pots hanging from hooks beside the stove. A rifle mounted above the door. Everything spoke of a solitary man who had learned to take care of himself but had not stopped caring about his surroundings. "You keep it very neat," she observed. "No point living in squalor." He moved to the stove and began building up the fire. "I am not much of a cook, though. Can manage the basics, but that is about it. If you can improve on bacon and beans, I will be grateful." "I can cook." She moved to join him, studying the supplies on the shelves. Flour, sugar, coffee, salt pork, dried beans, the staples of frontier life. "My mother taught me before she died, and my aunt insisted I earn my keep by managing her kitchen. Then you will put me to shame." He straightened, studying her. "Are you hungry, tired? I can make us some supper, or you can rest if you prefer." The journey had been exhausting, but Lydia found herself reluctant to retreat to the solitude of her room. "I would like to help with supper, if that is acceptable. It will give me a chance to familiarize myself with your kitchen." "Our kitchen," he corrected again, and she felt a small flutter of warmth at the word. They worked together in companionable silence, Lydia taking stock of what was available while Pierce brought in water from the pump outside. She found dried beef and potatoes and onions in the root cellar, and set about making a simple but hearty stew. Pierce watched her work with undisguised interest, occasionally offering information about where things were stored, and she found herself relaxing in a way she had not expected. "You move around a kitchen like you know what you are doing," he observed. "I've had practice." She stirred the pot, adjusting the heat. "My aunt had very exacting standards. If a meal was not perfect, she made her displeasure known. Sounds like a hard woman. She was bitter. Her husband died young, leaving her with 4 children and debts. She never forgave him for it, and I think she resented having to take me in." Lydia surprised herself with the honesty. She had not spoken of her aunt to anyone, had kept the unhappiness of those years locked away. But something about Pierce invited confidence. "You do not have to worry about that here," Pierce said quietly. "I asked you to come, Lydia. You are not a burden." She looked up from the pot, meeting his steady gaze. "Why did you choose me?" "You must have received other letters from women without scars, women who could offer you more." "I received 5 letters," he admitted. 3 of them spent more time talking about what they expected from a husband than what they could bring to a marriage. One was from a woman who admitted she was running from the law. He paused. "Yours was different. You were honest about your circumstances, but you did not ask for pity. You wrote about wanting to be useful, about understanding hard work. And you asked me questions about my life instead of just talking about yourself." "I wanted to know who you were," Lydia said softly, "and I wanted someone who cared enough to ask." He moved to the table and began setting out plates. "The scars did not factor into my decision, Lydia. They are part of what happened to you, not who you are." She had to turn away to hide the tears that threatened. In 3 years, no one had understood that distinction. The scars had become her identity, the first thing people saw and often the only thing they remembered. But Pierce looked at her and saw a person, a woman with thoughts and feelings and value beyond her appearance. They ate dinner as the sun set beyond the windows, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Pierce asked about her journey west, and she found herself describing the other passengers on the train. The overwhelming chaos of San Francisco, where she had changed trains. The stark beauty of the Nevada landscape, as the stagecoach had carried her toward Belmont. He listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions, and she realized he was as curious about her as she was about him. "What made you come to Nevada?" she asked as she cleared the plates. "Silver." He leaned back in his chair, cradling a cup of coffee. "I grew up in Missouri, working on my father's farm. It was good land, but there were 3 sons and only 1 farm. My older brother would inherit, and my younger brother was content to work for him. I wanted something of my own." He paused, staring into his coffee. "Came out here in '67, thinking I would strike it rich in the mines. Spent 2 years underground before I figured out that the only people getting rich were the ones selling supplies to miners. So you bought land instead." "Took every penny I had saved, plus a loan from the bank that I just finished paying off last year." He smiled slightly. "Sarah thought I was crazy. She had followed me out from Missouri, and we got married right after I bought this place. She wanted me to keep mining, said ranching was too uncertain. But you did it anyway." I did it because I could not spend the rest of my life in the dark, breathing dust and wondering if each day would be my last. He met her eyes. Sometimes you have to take a risk on what you believe in, even if other people think you are wrong. Lydia understood that better than he knew. Coming west to marry a stranger was the biggest risk she had ever taken, but staying in Pennsylvania had felt like a slow death. Do you regret it? The ranch? Never. It is hard work, but it is mine. I built something here. His expression clouded. I regret that Sarah never got to see it succeed. She died the third year before things really started coming together. Sometimes I wonder if she would have liked it better if she had just held on a little longer. You cannot know that, Lydia said gently. And torturing yourself with what might have been does not change what is. You sound like you have experience with that kind of thinking. I spent the first year after the fire wondering what I could have done differently. If I had woken up sooner, if I had been braver, maybe I could have saved them. She touched the scars on her face without thinking. Eventually, I realized that I was just making myself suffer twice. Once for what happened, and again for what I imagined I could have prevented. Pierce was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. How did you stop? I decided to live for the future instead of the past. It is not easy, and some days I fail completely. But it is better than the alternative. She managed a small smile. Coming here is part of that, choosing to believe that there might be something better ahead. I hope I can give you that, he said softly. I hope we can give it to each other. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and possibility. Pierce stood collecting the cups. You must be exhausted. Why do not you get settled in your room? I will finish cleaning up. I can help. I know you can. But you have had a long journey, and there will be plenty of work tomorrow. He smiled at her, and she noticed for the first time that he had a slight dimple in his left cheek. Get some rest, Lydia. We have time. Her room was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed covered in a faded quilt, a dresser with a cracked mirror, and a washstand in the corner. Her trunk sat at the foot of the bed, and she opened it slowly, pulling out her few possessions. 2 dresses besides the one she wore, a nightgown, a hairbrush that had been her mother's, a small wooden box containing the few pieces of jewelry that had survived the fire, a Bible with her family's names written in the front. She unpacked methodically, finding homes for everything in the dresser, then changed into her nightgown and brushed out her hair. The mirror reflected her scarred face back at her, and she studied her reflection with the critical eye of long practice. The scars were still angry-looking in lamplight, still obviously disfiguring. But for the first time in 3 years, she let herself consider that perhaps they did not define her worth. You are beautiful to me. The memory of Pierce's words made her throat tight with emotion. She had not realized how much she needed to hear something like that, how deeply the constant rejection and pity had wounded her. Pierce had looked at her scars and seen past them, had called her beautiful without qualification or hesitation, and something frozen inside her chest had begun to thaw. Sleep came more easily than she expected in the unfamiliar room. The bed was comfortable, and through the open window she could hear the sounds of the ranch settling into night, cattle lowing in the distance, the whisper of wind through sagebrush, the creak of the house itself. It was so different from the city sounds she had grown accustomed to in Pennsylvania, but she found it soothing. She woke to the sound of movement in the main room and lay still for a moment, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then memory returned and she rose quickly, dressing in the dim pre-dawn light. When she emerged from her room, she found Pierce crouched in front of the fireplace, building up the fire for breakfast. You did not have to get up, he said without turning around. I wanted to. She moved to the kitchen area, assessing what was available. What do you normally have for breakfast? Coffee and whatever is left from the night before. He stood, brushing ash from his hands. I am usually in a hurry to get to work. Let me make you something proper. She found eggs in the cold box and bacon hanging in the larder. You cannot work on an empty stomach. He did not argue, instead pouring them both coffee and settling at the table to watch her work. She was conscious of his gaze as she moved around the kitchen, but it was not the uncomfortable scrutiny she had grown accustomed to. He seemed genuinely interested in what she was doing, occasionally offering comments about where she could find various supplies. My mother always said breakfast was the most important meal, Lydia said as she placed a plate of eggs and bacon in front of him. She would be horrified at the thought of starting a day with just coffee. She sounds like a wise woman. Pierce took a bite, and his eyebrows rose. This is the best breakfast I have had in years. It is just eggs and bacon. Yes, but they are cooked properly instead of burned to a crisp. He ate with obvious appreciation. I have definitely been doing this wrong. They ate together as the sun began to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Pierce told her about his plans for the day, checking on the cattle in the north pasture and repairing a section of fence that had been damaged in a recent storm. She listened, filing away information about the rhythm and routine of ranch life. "What would you like me to do today?" she asked as she cleared the dishes. "Whatever you feel up to. You are still getting settled." He pulled on his hat, preparing to head outside. "I would rather be useful." "Please, Pierce, give me something to do." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "The garden behind the house has been neglected. If you are interested in tending it, I would be grateful. Fresh vegetables would be a welcome change from dried beans. And the chickens need feeding and their eggs collected. I can do that." She followed him to the door. "What time should I have lunch ready?" "I usually just eat something cold around midday. Do not bother with a hot meal." "Would you like to continue doing that, or would you prefer something warm?" A slow smile spread across his face. "Are you always this determined to take care of people?" "I like being useful," she admitted. "And I suspect you have been taking care of yourself for so long that you have forgotten what it is like to have someone else share the burden. You might be right about that." He settled his hat more firmly on his head. "If it is not too much trouble, a hot lunch would be wonderful." She spent the morning exploring her new home in the daylight. The garden was indeed neglected, choked with weeds and gone wild, but she could see the bones of what it had once been. Potato plants struggling beneath the weeds, carrot tops barely visible, what might be squash vines. She found tools in the barn and set to work clearing the worst of the overgrowth, her hands remembering the rhythm of garden work from her childhood. The chickens were fat and lazy, clearly accustomed to being fed regularly, but not handled much. She collected eggs carefully, checking each nesting box, and found herself charmed by their fussy clucking. There was something deeply satisfying about these simple chores, about tending to living things and seeing immediate results from her efforts. She made lunch from leftover stew, warming it and baking quick biscuits in the cast-iron oven. Pierce returned at noon, dusty and hot, and his face lit up when he saw the table set for a meal. "You have been busy," he observed, washing his hands at the pump. "The garden has potential. It will take several days to clear it completely, but I think we can salvage most of it." She ladled stew into bowls. "And your chickens are excellent layers. Sarah used to tend the chickens." The words came out carefully, and Lydia sensed he was testing how she would react to mentions of his first wife. She had names for all of them, talked to them like they could understand her. "That is sweet." Lydia set his bowl in front of him. "It must be hard being reminded of her." "Yes and no." He broke a biscuit in half, steam rising from the fluffy interior. I loved Sarah. We grew up together, and I cannot imagine my life without having known her. But she has been gone 4 years now, and I have learned to live with the memories instead of being haunted by them. He met Lydia's eyes. I do not want you to feel like you are competing with a ghost. This is your home now, and I want you to make it yours. Thank you. The words were simple, but they carried weight. I will do my best to honor what she built here while making my own place. That is all I can ask. The afternoon passed in comfortable industry. Lydia returned to the garden while Pierce rode out to check on the cattle. By the time evening arrived, she had cleared 3 rows and could see the full scope of what needed to be done. Her hands were blistered despite her gloves, and her back ached from bending over, but she felt a deep satisfaction at the visible progress. Dinner was roasted chicken and vegetables from what she had salvaged from the garden, and Pierce ate with the focused attention of a man who was genuinely hungry. She found herself studying him when he was not looking, noting the way his shoulders relaxed as the day's work fell away, the small smile that played around his mouth when he tasted something he particularly enjoyed. "Tell me about Missouri," she said as they lingered over coffee. "What was it like growing up there, green?" He smiled at the memory. Everything was green, especially in summer. Trees everywhere, humidity you could cut with a knife. Nothing like Nevada. He paused. My family had a good farm, lots of acres. We worked hard, but there was always food on the table and a roof over our heads. My parents were good people, fair and honest. You miss them? Sometimes. But I have not been back since I left, and I doubt I ever will. That life was not for me, no matter how much my father wanted it to be. He studied his coffee. What about your family? What were they like before the fire? Lydia felt the familiar tightness in her chest that always accompanied thoughts of her family, but she pushed through it. My father was a schoolteacher. He loved books and learning, always had his nose in some text or another. My mother was the practical one, kept us all organized and fed. And my brother Thomas was 12 when he died, just starting to think about what he wanted to do with his life. You must miss them terribly. Every day. She traced the rim of her cup with one finger, but talking about them helps. For a long time I tried not to think about them at all because it hurt too much, but that felt like losing them twice, erasing them from memory as well as reality. I understand that. Pierce reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the gesture brief but comforting. We can talk about them whenever you want, both our families, both our pasts. They are part of what made us who we are. The days fell into a pattern. Pierce rose before dawn and worked until dark, tending to the endless demands of the ranch. Lydia managed the house and garden, collected eggs, prepared meals, and slowly made the space her own. They ate together morning and evening, their conversations growing longer and more personal as they learned each other's rhythms and preferences. On Sunday, 1 week after her arrival, Pierce suggested they ride out to see more of the property. Lydia had not been on a horse since childhood, but the gentle mare Pierce saddled for her seemed to sense her nervousness and responded with patience. They rode through the valley and up into the hills, Pierce pointing out property boundaries and notable features of the landscape. "This section has the best grazing," he explained as they paused on a ridge overlooking a broad meadow. "The grass stays green longer here because of the creek, and that stand of trees provides shade for the cattle in summer. How many head do you run?" Lydia asked, pleased that she was beginning to understand the terminology. "About 300 right now. Could probably support twice that if I wanted to expand, but I prefer to keep it manageable." He dismounted and helped her down from her mare. "Come here, I want to show you something." He led her to a spot where the ridge fell away, offering a panoramic view of the entire ranch. The house and outbuildings looked tiny from this height, nestled in their valley like toys. The creek caught the sunlight, a ribbon of silver threading through the landscape. And beyond it all, the mountains rose in stark majesty, their peaks touching the endless sky. "This is why I bought this place," Pierce said quietly. "Standing here, looking at all this space and possibility, I knew I could build something that mattered, something that would last beyond my lifetime." "It is beautiful," Lydia breathed, and she meant it. The harsh landscape had revealed its secrets to her over the past week, and she had come to appreciate its austere beauty. "I used to come up here when things got hard after Sarah died," Pierce continued. "It reminded me that there was more to life than grief, that the world kept turning whether I was ready or not." He glanced at her. "I have not been up here in over a year, did not feel the need anymore." "What changed? You arrived." He said it simply, without drama or embellishment. "Suddenly, the house did not feel so empty, and I did not need to escape to find perspective." Lydia felt her heart skip. They had been careful with each other over the past week, friendly but maintaining a certain distance. But standing here on this ridge, looking at the world he had built, she felt the walls between them beginning to crumble. "Pierce, I need to tell you something." The words came out before she could reconsider them. "All right. When I answered your advertisement, I was desperate. My aunt's children had made it clear I needed to leave, and I had no other options. I told myself I was being practical, that marriage to a stranger was better than destitution." She turned to face him. "But this past week with you has been better than I ever imagined. You are kind and patient, and you make me feel valued in a way I have not felt since before the fire. And I need you to know that I am not here out of desperation anymore. I am here because I want to be." Pierce was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes searching her face. "I placed that advertisement because I was lonely, and I told myself I needed help with the ranch. But watching you move through the house, listening to you talk about your family, seeing you bring life back to the garden, I realized I did not just want help. I wanted a partner. Someone to share all this with." He gestured at the landscape spread before them. "I am glad you answered my letter, Lydia, gladder than I know how to say. So where do we go from here? Forward." He smiled, and the dimple appeared in his cheek. "We keep learning about each other. We build something together. We see what develops." "That sounds good to me." He offered her his hand, and she took it, their fingers interlacing naturally. They stood together on the ridge, looking out over the ranch, and Lydia felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she was meant to be. This was home. The weeks passed, summer sliding toward autumn with the subtle shifts in light and temperature that marked the changing seasons in Nevada. The garden flourished under Lydia's care, producing squash and beans and tomatoes and peppers. She learned to preserve food for winter, filling the root cellar with jars of vegetables and fruits she bought in town. The house began to reflect her presence in small ways. Curtains she sewed for the windows, a tablecloth she embroidered on quiet evenings. Fresh flowers from the garden when they were available. Pierce taught her to ride properly, and she began accompanying him on some of his daily rounds. She learned to spot trouble in the cattle, to identify which sections of fence needed attention, to read the weather in the shape of clouds and the behavior of animals. He was a patient teacher, never making her feel foolish for asking questions, and she absorbed information eagerly. "You have taken to ranch life better than I expected," he said one evening as they groomed their horses after a long day. "Most women from back east struggle with how isolated it is out here. I like the isolation." Lydia ran the brush over her mare's flank in smooth strokes. "After the fire, I felt like everyone was always watching me, judging me. Here, the only opinions that matter are yours and mine. And what is your opinion of ranch life?" He looked at her over his horse's back, his expression curious. "I love it." The admission came easily, without hesitation. I love the work, the routine, the sense of accomplishment at the end of each day. I love how quiet it is, how you can hear yourself think. I love watching the sun rise from the kitchen window while I make breakfast. She paused, choosing her words carefully. And I love sharing it with you. Pierce set down his brush and came around his horse to stand in front of her. Lydia, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. All right. Are you happy here? Truly happy, not just making the best of a difficult situation? She met his eyes without flinching. I am happier than I have been in 3 years, maybe happier than I have ever been. Why do you ask? Because I am falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. I did not expect it to happen this fast, and I do not want to pressure you if you do not feel the same way, but I needed you to know. Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs. You are falling in love with me, even with these. She touched the scars on her face. The scars are part of your face, Lydia, but they are not what I see when I look at you. He reached up and gently traced the line of the scars with his fingertips, his touch feather-light. I see a woman who survived something terrible and did not let it break her. I see someone who works hard and takes pride in what she does. I see kindness and intelligence and courage. And yes, I see beauty. Not despite the scars, but including them. They are part of your story, part of what makes you who you are. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she made no effort to stop them. I am falling in love with you too. I have been fighting it because I was afraid it was too soon, too fast. But every day I wake up grateful to be here, grateful to know you. You make me feel seen in a way I never have before. Pierce pulled her into his arms and she went willingly, resting her head against his chest. She could hear his heart beating, strong and steady, and felt his arms around her like a promise. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet barn while the horses shuffled contentedly in their stalls. I think we should get married properly, Pierce said into her hair. We did not exactly have a wedding when you arrived, just signed the papers in town. I want to do it right. Let the whole town know you are my wife. We are already married legally, Lydia pointed out, though the idea pleased her more than she wanted to admit. I know. But I want to stand up in front of witnesses and make vows to you. I want to celebrate starting our life together instead of just acknowledging a contract. He pulled back to look at her face. Unless you would prefer not to, I know some women do not like being the center of attention. I would like that, she said softly. I would like it very much. They rode into Belmont the following Saturday to make arrangements with the minister. Lydia had been to town only twice since her arrival, both times staying close to Pierce and avoiding unnecessary interaction with the townspeople. But today she walked with her head high, her hand tucked into the crook of Pierce's elbow, and met curious stares with calm dignity. The minister, a kindly man named Reverend Matthews, was delighted to conduct a wedding ceremony and suggested the following Sunday. We will make it part of the regular service, he said warmly. Let the whole congregation witness your vows and celebrate with you afterward. As they left the church, they encountered a woman about Lydia's age standing on the wooden sidewalk. She had dark hair and warm brown eyes, and she smiled when she saw them. Pierce Vaughn, as I live and breathe, she said. I heard you had brought a bride out from back east, but I have not had a chance to meet her yet. Lydia, this is Margaret Porter. She runs the boarding house with her mother. Pierce performed the introduction easily. Margaret, my wife, Lydia Vaughn. A pleasure to meet you. Margaret offered her hand without hesitation, her eyes taking in Lydia's scars without any visible reaction. I hope you are settling in well. Ranch life can be an adjustment. I am settling in very well, thank you. Lydia found herself warming to the other woman's straightforward manner. It is different from what I am accustomed to, but I am enjoying the change. You must come to the next quilting circle, Margaret said enthusiastically. We meet twice a month at the church. It is mostly an excuse for the women to gossip and catch up on news, but we do get some sewing done too. The next meeting is Wednesday afternoon. Lydia glanced at Pierce, who nodded encouragingly. I would like that, she said. Thank you for the invitation. Wonderful. I will see you then. Margaret squeezed her hand and hurried off down the street. She seems very nice, Lydia observed as they walked toward the general store. Margaret is good people. She and her mother had a hard time after her father died, but they have built a solid business with the boarding house. Pierce held the door for her. I am glad she invited you to the quilting circle. It will be good for you to have friends here. The general store was packed with supplies of every description, and Lydia moved through the aisles with growing excitement. Pierce had given her a generous amount of money to buy fabric for a wedding dress, along with anything else she needed. She selected a soft blue cotton that reminded her of the Nevada sky, along with lace for trim and white ribbon. The storekeeper, a taciturn man named Henry Mitchell, wrapped her purchases without comment, but gave her a respectful nod as they left. That went well, Pierce said as they loaded their goods into the wagon. Everyone has been much kinder than I expected. Lydia settled onto the wagon seat beside him. I thought there would be more staring, more whispers. Belmont is a small town, and most of the people here have faced their own hardships. They are less likely to judge than folks in bigger cities. He guided the horses onto the road heading out of town. Plus, Margaret Porter is the biggest gossip in 3 counties. If she has decided she likes you, the rest of the town will follow her lead. Lydia spent every spare moment over the next week working on her dress. She had learned fine sewing from her mother, and her stitches were small, and even as she constructed the simple but elegant gown. Pierce watched her work in the evenings, ostensibly reading but frequently looking up from his book to observe her progress. You are very skilled, he commented one night as she attached the lace collar. My mother believed every woman should know how to sew well. She said it was the difference between looking respectable and looking poor. Lydia smoothed the fabric. I am glad she taught me. This is the first truly new dress I have had since before the fire. It is beautiful. You will be beautiful in it. She looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. The attraction that had been building between them over the past weeks seemed to fill the small room, and she set aside her sewing carefully. Pierce. He stood and crossed to her, pulling her to her feet. I have been very patient, he said quietly, but I think I have reached my limit. What do you mean? I mean, I would very much like to kiss you if you are amenable. Her heart raced. I am amenable. He cupped her scarred cheek gently, his thumb tracing the ridges of damaged skin, then lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was tentative at first, a question more than a statement, but when she responded by sliding her arms around his neck, it deepened into something more certain. His other hand found the small of her back, pulling her closer, and she felt the solid strength of him against her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Pierce rested his forehead against hers. I have been wanting to do that for weeks. Why did you wait? I wanted to make sure you were ready, that you wanted it too. He smiled slightly. Was it worth the wait? Definitely. She kissed him again, marveling at how natural it felt, how right. This man who had seen past her scars to the woman beneath, who had given her a home and a purpose, and now his heart. They stood wrapped in each other's arms for a long time, the sewing forgotten, the house quiet around them. And when they finally pulled apart, Lydia knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice in coming to Nevada, in taking a chance on a stranger who had turned out to be exactly what she needed. Wednesday arrived, and Lydia rode into town alone for the quilting circle, her confidence bolstered by Pierce's encouraging words. The church basement was already full of women when she arrived, ranging in age from late teens to elderly. Margaret spotted her immediately and hurried over with a welcoming smile. "Lydia, I am so glad you came. Let me introduce you around." The next hour passed in a blur of names and faces. There was Ruth Anderson, the doctor's wife, who was heavily pregnant with her fourth child. Emma Sullivan, who ran the saloon and shocked the other women with her frank talk, but was clearly well-liked. Clara Jenkins, an elderly widow who had buried 3 husbands and had strong opinions about everything. And at least a dozen others, all of whom welcomed Lydia with varying degrees of warmth and curiosity. They settled into their work, and conversation flowed around Lydia as she focused on the quilt square she was stitching. The talk was wide-ranging, covering everything from recipes to ranch gossip to national politics. But it was Ruth Anderson who finally asked the question Lydia had been expecting. "If you do not mind my asking, how did you get those scars?" The room went quiet, all eyes turning to Lydia. She took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "There was a fire 3 years ago in Pennsylvania. My parents and younger brother died. I barely escaped." "How terrible," Ruth said softly, her hand going to her rounded belly. "I cannot imagine losing my family like that." "It was the worst thing that has ever happened to me," Lydia admitted. "But I survived, and eventually I decided I needed to build a new life. That is how I ended up answering Pierce's advertisement." "And are you happy here?" This from Emma, her painted face showing genuine interest. "Very happy. Pierce is a good man, and I love the ranch." Lydia met the other woman's eyes steadily. "I know some people might think it strange, marrying someone you have never met, but it has worked out better than I ever hoped." "Pierce Vaughn is one of the best men I know," Clara Jenkins announced firmly. "Lost his first wife too young, poor thing, but he never let it make him bitter. You are lucky to have him, and he is lucky to have you." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Lydia felt a warmth spreading through her chest. These women had accepted her, scars and all, without judgment or pity. It was more than she had dared hope for. As the meeting broke up, Margaret pulled her aside. "I am glad you came today, and I am glad you and Pierce found each other. He has been alone too long, and you seem like exactly the kind of woman who could make him happy." "I am certainly going to try," Lydia said with a smile. Sunday arrived with perfect autumn weather, the sky a brilliant blue and the air crisp but not cold. Lydia dressed in her new gown with trembling hands, arranging her hair as best she could and studying her reflection in the small mirror. The scars were as visible as ever, but today she found she did not mind them quite so much. They were part of her story, and Pierce loved her story. Pierce was waiting in the main room when she emerged, dressed in his best clothes with his hair neatly combed. His eyes widened when he saw her, and he crossed the room to take her hands. "You look absolutely beautiful," he said softly. "So do you." They rode to town together in the wagon, sitting close on the bench seat. The church was packed when they arrived, the entire town apparently having turned out to witness their vows. Reverend Matthews beamed at them from the front of the room, and Margaret waved enthusiastically from the third pew. The ceremony was simple but moving. They stood before the congregation and spoke vows of love and commitment, promising to honor and cherish each other through whatever life brought them. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Pierce kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of the assembled townspeople. The celebration afterward was held in the churchyard, with tables laden with food that various families had contributed. Lydia found herself overwhelmed by the warmth and generosity of people who had been strangers just weeks ago. They ate and danced and accepted congratulations until the sun began to set. "Ready to go home?" Pierce asked, his arm around her waist. "More than ready." They said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon, waving as they pulled away from the church. The ride home was quiet, both of them lost in thought, but Pierce kept one hand on her knee and she covered it with her own. When they reached the ranch, Pierce helped her down from the wagon and then, to her surprise, swept her up into his arms. "What are you doing, carrying my bride over the threshold?" He grinned at her. "It is tradition. We have been living here together for 2 months. So, we are married now, officially, in front of witnesses. That calls for some traditional gestures." He carried her into the house and set her down gently in the main room. The fire he had built before they left was still burning low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Lydia turned to face him, suddenly nervous. "Pierce, I should tell you that I have never been with a man before." "I assumed as much." His voice was gentle. "We can take this as slow as you need, Lydia. There is no rush, I know, but I do not want to wait any more." She reached up to cup his face. "I love you and I want to be your wife in every way." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, his hands coming up to cradle her head. She responded eagerly, her nervousness giving way to desire as he held her. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with emotion. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." He took her hand and led her to his room, which she had not entered since arriving at the ranch. It was sparsely furnished but clean, with a large bed covered in a thick quilt. He lit the lamp on the bedside table, and in its soft glow he began to help her undress, his movements slow and careful. "You are so beautiful," he murmured as he unlaced her dress. "Every part of you." She helped him out of his own clothes, marveling at the lean strength of his body, the scars and calluses that spoke of hard work and harder times. When they were both undressed, he drew her down onto the bed and proceeded to show her, with patience and tenderness, what it meant to be loved completely. Later, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Lydia traced idle patterns on his chest. "That was not what I expected." "Good or bad?" "Very, very good." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "I was afraid it would hurt more or be awkward. You are a natural." He smiled and pulled her down for another kiss, "and we have the rest of our lives to get even better at it." The seasons turned, autumn giving way to winter. Snow fell in the mountains and dusted the valley, and the ranch settled into the quieter rhythms of the cold months. Pierce spent more time in the house, working on equipment repairs and planning for spring, and Lydia relished having him close. They read together by the fire in the evenings, played cards and talked about everything and nothing. Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly, just the two of them. Lydia made a special dinner and presented Pierce with a warm scarf she had knitted. He gave her a beautiful hand-tooled leather journal, "for writing down your thoughts or recipes or whatever you want," he explained. "I noticed you did not have much in the way of books or writing materials." She kissed him, touched by his thoughtfulness. "It is perfect, thank you." They made love slowly that night, taking their time to explore and please each other, and afterward, Lydia lay in his arms feeling more content than she ever had in her life. "I have been thinking," Pierce said into the darkness. "What would you think about expanding the herd come spring? Maybe buying more land if any becomes available. I think it sounds like a good plan." "Why?" "Because I want to build something substantial here, not just for us but for our children someday." He stroked her hair. "Do you want children, Lydia?" "I do." She had not let herself think much about children, had been afraid to hope for that kind of future. "Do you?" "I know what happened with Sarah and the baby was traumatic." "I was terrified of the idea for a long time," he admitted. "But with you, I find myself imagining a family again." Boys to help with the ranch, girls with your determination and kindness. A house full of life and laughter. That sounds wonderful. She turned in his arms to face him. But let us enjoy just being married for a while first. We have time. We have all the time in the world. Spring arrived with a rush of green growth and new calves. The ranch kept them both busy from dawn until dark, but they worked side by side more often than not, falling into bed each night exhausted but happy. The garden flourished under Lydia's expert care, and she began preserving vegetables and making cheese from the cow Pierce had bought her for her birthday. In early summer, Lydia realized she had missed her monthly cycle twice and felt a flutter of excitement mixed with apprehension. She waited another week to be sure, then told Pierce one evening after dinner, "I think I might be pregnant." He went very still, his eyes searching her face. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there. How do you feel about it?" His voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the hope and fear warring in his expression. Excited, a little scared, happy. She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby, Pierce." His face crumpled, and she realized he was crying. She had never seen him cry before, and she held him as he processed the news, his shoulders shaking with emotion. "I am so happy," he managed finally, "and so scared. What if something goes wrong like it did with Sarah? We will get through it together." She tilted his face up to look at her. "I am healthy and strong, and we have a good doctor in town. We will be careful and smart, and we will welcome this baby into the world with all the love we have." He kissed her then, a kiss that tasted of salt and hope, and she felt the last of her own fear melting away. They could do this. Together, they could face anything. Ruth Anderson confirmed the pregnancy a week later and declared Lydia healthy and progressing normally. She estimated the baby would arrive in late January or early February, and she gave Lydia detailed instructions on caring for herself during the pregnancy. "You are lucky to have Pierce," Ruth said as she packed up her medical bag. "He will take good care of you, and if you have any concerns at all, do not hesitate to send for me or my husband." Pierce did indeed take excellent care of her. As her pregnancy progressed and her body changed, he adjusted their work routines to ensure she was not overtaxing herself. He took over the heavier garden chores and insisted she rest in the afternoons. When she protested that she was pregnant, not ill, he simply kissed her and pointed out that keeping her healthy was his job. "You are carrying our child," he said firmly. "Let me do this." She learned to accept his help, to lean on his strength when she needed it. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though she experienced the usual discomforts. Pierce was endlessly patient with her mood swings and food cravings, and he seemed fascinated by the changes in her body. "You are beautiful," he said one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her swollen belly. "Absolutely radiant. I feel like a barn." "A beautiful barn." He grinned at her outraged expression. "I am serious, Lydia. You have never been more beautiful to me than you are right now." The baby kicked, a strong flutter against his palm, and his eyes widened with wonder. "Did you feel that?" "I feel it all the time now." She guided his hand to where the movement was strongest, especially at night when I am trying to sleep. They spent long evenings talking about names, debating whether they wanted a boy or a girl, planning for the changes a baby would bring. Pierce began work on a cradle, carving it from cedar with patient precision, and Lydia sewed tiny clothes and blankets. Margaret and the other women from the quilting circle threw her a party in December, showering her with gifts and advice. Lydia sat in the circle of these women who had become her friends and felt grateful beyond words for the community she had found. "You are going to be a wonderful mother," Margaret said, hugging her carefully. "And Pierce is going to be an excellent father." As January arrived and Lydia grew increasingly uncomfortable, Pierce became almost comically protective. He barely let her out of his sight, and he insisted on sleeping lightly so he would wake if she needed anything. She found it endearing and exasperating in equal measure. "I am not made of glass," she told him one morning as he helped her to her feet. "I know, but you are carrying the most precious cargo in the world and I am not taking any chances." He kissed her forehead. "Humor me, please." The baby arrived on a cold February night during a snowstorm. Lydia's labor started in the afternoon, and Pierce immediately rode to town to fetch Ruth Anderson, then returned to pace anxiously beside the bed. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Lydia was certain she could not endure another contraction. But Ruth coached her through it with calm expertise, and Pierce held her hand and spoke encouragement, even when she cursed him for getting her pregnant in the first place. Finally, as dawn broke over the snow-covered ranch, their son entered the world with a lusty cry. Ruth cleaned him quickly and placed him in Lydia's arms, and she looked down at the small, perfect face and felt her heart expand to accommodate a love she had never imagined possible. "He is beautiful," she whispered. Pierce sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, staring at their son with an expression of awe. "He really is. Look at all that dark hair." "What should we name him?" Lydia asked, unable to tear her eyes away from the baby. "I was thinking Thomas, after your brother." "If that is all right with you." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "That is more than all right. Thomas Pierce Vaughn. It is perfect." Ruth stayed for a few hours to make sure both mother and baby were stable, then left with strict instructions for Pierce about caring for them both. He took to fatherhood with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else, changing diapers and walking the floor with a crying baby in the middle of the night without complaint. "You are amazing with him," Lydia observed one evening as she watched Pierce rock Thomas to sleep. "He is my son. Of course I am going to take care of him." He looked up with a smile. "Besides, you did all the hard work growing him and bringing him into the world. The least I can do is change a few diapers." The months that followed were exhausting but joyful. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and growing quickly, and he had Pierce's blue eyes and Lydia's determined chin. They took turns walking him when he was fussy, and Pierce built an ingenious cradle that rocked gently beside their bed so Lydia could nurse without fully waking. Spring came again, bringing new life to the ranch. Pierce hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload, and with the extra help, he was able to spend more time with Lydia and Thomas. They took family rides on sunny afternoons, Thomas secure in a sling against Lydia's chest, and Pierce taught him to recognize the sounds of the ranch even though he was far too young to understand. "You are going to be a rancher like your father," Pierce told the baby seriously. "But first you need to learn to walk and talk." Thomas gurgled and grabbed Pierce's finger with a surprisingly strong grip, and Lydia watched them together with her heart full to bursting. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Thomas took his first steps the week before his first birthday, lurching across the kitchen into Pierce's waiting arms. He spoke his first word at 14 months, which was "Papa" to Pierce's obvious delight and Lydia's mock indignation. He grew into a bright, curious toddler who followed his father around the ranch like a shadow and helped his mother in the garden with more enthusiasm than skill. When Thomas was 3, Lydia discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news brought only joy, no fear, and Pierce swung her around the kitchen in celebration before remembering himself and setting her down gently. Their daughter was born in October, an easier delivery than Thomas had been. She came into the world with a full head of red gold hair that neither parent could account for, and a calm temperament that was entirely her own. They named her Sarah Margaret, after Pierce's first wife and Lydia's best friend, and she was doted on by her older brother from the moment he met her. "Baby," Thomas announced firmly, patting her head with clumsy gentleness. "My baby." "Our baby," Lydia corrected with a smile. "You are her big brother, which means you help take care of her." Thomas took this responsibility seriously, fetching diapers and singing to Sarah when she cried and insisting on being involved in everything related to her care. Pierce watched his children with obvious pride and pulled Lydia close whenever he could. "We built something good here," he said one evening as they watched Thomas carefully hold Sarah on the porch while the sun set. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "We did." Lydia leaned into his embrace. "And we are not done yet." 2 years later, their second son arrived, completing their family. They named him James after Pierce's father, and he proved to be the most adventurous of the 3 children, constantly getting into mischief and testing boundaries. But he was also sweet and affectionate, quick to hug and kiss and declare his love. The ranch continued to prosper. Pierce bought adjoining land when it became available, expanding their grazing territory and increasing the herd. The 2 ranch hands became permanent fixtures, building their own cabins on the property and becoming part of the extended family. Lydia's garden grew larger each year, and she began selling her excess produce and preserves in town, earning a reputation for quality and fair prices. Belmont itself was changing. The silver mines had played out completely, and many families moved on to seek prosperity elsewhere. But a core group remained, determined to build a sustainable community based on ranching and agriculture rather than mining. Pierce became an unofficial leader in these efforts, hosting meetings at the ranch and working with other ranchers to establish fair prices and cooperative ventures. Margaret married a widower from a neighboring ranch and had 2 children of her own, and the friendship between her and Lydia deepened over shared experiences of motherhood and ranch life. Ruth Anderson's children grew up alongside the Vaughn children, creating a close-knit group of youngsters who ran wild across the Nevada hills. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Pierce surprised Lydia with a trip to Carson City, their first time away from the ranch without the children since Thomas was born. Margaret and her husband agreed to watch the children, and Pierce and Lydia spent 3 days exploring the city, eating in restaurants and staying in a hotel that felt luxurious after years of ranch living. "This is wonderful," Lydia said as they walked through the city streets hand in hand. "But I miss the children already." "So do I." Pierce pulled her close. "It is strange how they become such a part of you that even a few days apart feels wrong." "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Taking a chance on a scarred woman from Pennsylvania, you could have chosen differently." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to cup her face. His thumbs traced the familiar lines of her scars with infinite gentleness. "I have never regretted it for a single moment. You are the best decision I ever made, Lydia. These scars tell the story of your survival, your strength. They are part of what makes you beautiful to me." She kissed him there on the street, not caring who saw, pouring 10 years of love and gratitude into the embrace. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "Take me home," she said. "I want to see our children." They returned to the ranch to a chaotic welcome, all 3 children rushing to greet them with shouts and hugs. Thomas, now 10, tried to maintain dignity but quickly gave in to childish enthusiasm. Sarah, 7, chattered nonstop about everything they had done while their parents were gone. And James, 5, simply clung to Lydia's skirt and refused to let go. "Looks like they missed you," Margaret said with a laugh. That night, after the children were finally settled in bed, Pierce and Lydia stood on the porch looking out over the ranch. The buildings had multiplied over the years, and the land showed the marks of careful stewardship and hard work. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully under the rising moon. "You remember standing on the ridge the first week you were here?" Pierce asked, his arm around her waist. "Of course. You told me you came here to build something that would last." "I did, and we have." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes reflecting the moonlight. "But the ranch is not what I am most proud of, Lydia. It is us, our family, the life we have built together. That is what will last beyond our lifetimes." She leaned into him, feeling the solid strength that had been her anchor for 10 years. "I love you, Pierce Vaughn, more today than the day I married you and less than I will tomorrow." "I love you too," he kissed her softly. "My beautiful wife." The years continued to unfold, bringing challenges and triumphs in equal measure. There were hard winters that tested their resources and their resolve. There were droughts that required careful water management and difficult decisions about the herd. There were illnesses and accidents, the inevitable trials of ranch life. But there were also moments of profound joy. Watching Thomas grow into a capable young man who shared his father's love of the land. Seeing Sarah develop a gift for healing that led her to apprentice with Ruth Anderson. Witnessing James discover a talent for working with horses that made him invaluable to the ranch operations. Pierce's hair began to gray at the temples, and lines deepened around his eyes. Lydia's scars faded slightly with time, becoming silver against her tanned skin. But they still looked at each other with the same love and desire that had brought them together. Still found reasons to steal moments alone, despite the busy demands of family and ranch. On their 20th anniversary, surrounded by their children and a gathering of friends from Belmont, Pierce stood to make a toast. The dining table was laden with food that Lydia and Sarah had prepared, and the house was full of laughter and conversation. 20 years ago, Pierce began, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room, a stagecoach arrived in Belmont carrying the woman who would change my life. I had placed an advertisement for a wife, expecting practicality and partnership. What I got was so much more. He looked at Lydia, and she felt her eyes fill with familiar tears. Even after all these years, he could still move her with just a look. Lydia arrived with scars that told a story of survival and strength. She had lost everything but refused to be broken. And when I looked at her that first day, I saw not damage but beauty, not someone who needed fixing but someone who was already whole. He raised his glass. "To my wife, my partner, the mother of my children. You are as beautiful to me today as you were that July afternoon, and I thank God every day that you answered my letter." The room erupted in cheers and applause, and Lydia crossed to Pierce, wrapping her arms around him as she had done countless times before. Their children watched with the slightly embarrassed affection of young people witnessing their parents' love, and their friends looked on with warm approval. "Thank you," Lydia whispered against his chest, "for seeing me when everyone else looked away, for loving me exactly as I am." "Always," he promised, and kissed her to more cheers and applause. As the celebration continued around them, Lydia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The fire that had scarred her body but not her spirit, the desperate act of answering a stranger's advertisement. The leap of faith required to travel across the country to an unknown future. It had all led to this moment, this life, this love. The scars she carried were still visible, would always be visible, but they no longer defined her. She was Lydia Vaughn, wife and mother, rancher and friend. She was loved deeply and loved deeply in return. She had built a life from ashes and found beauty in the harsh Nevada landscape. She had proven that scars were not the end of the story, but simply marks along the way. Thomas approached with Sarah and James flanking him, all three looking serious. "Mother, father, we have something to tell you," Thomas said, attempting to sound adult and authoritative. "Oh," Pierce raised an eyebrow. "Should we be worried? We have been discussing it, and we want you to know that we plan to keep the ranch going," Sarah announced. "Thomas will manage the cattle operations. I will handle the medical care for both animals and people, and James will oversee the horse breeding program we have been developing." "We are not going anywhere," James added firmly. "This is our home, and we want to build on what you have created." Lydia looked at Pierce, seeing her own emotion reflected in his face. Their children, choosing to continue what they had started, committing to the land and the life that had given them all so much. "Nothing could make us happier," Pierce said, his voice rough with feeling. "But you should know that you are free to choose your own paths. We will support you no matter what." "We know," Thomas said, "but this is what we want, to honor what you have built and make it even better for the next generation." The celebration continued late into the night, and when the last guests had departed and the children had finally gone to bed, Pierce and Lydia stood once more on the porch. The moon was full, painting the ranch in silver light, and the night was full of the familiar sounds that had become the soundtrack of their lives. "Are you happy?" Pierce asked softly. Lydia turned to look at him, this man who had given her everything when she had nothing, who had called her beautiful when the world called her damaged, who had built a life with her based on respect and partnership and deep, abiding love. "More than I ever thought possible," she said truthfully. "You gave me a home, Pierce, not just a house or a place to live, but a real home. A place where I belong, where I am valued for who I am, where my scars are just part of my story, not the whole story." "You gave me that too," he said, pulling her close. "After Sarah died, I thought I would spend the rest of my life going through the motions. Working the ranch, surviving but not really living. Then you arrived and everything changed. You brought light back into my life, Lydia. You gave me hope and joy and a reason to build something that mattered." They stood together in the moonlight, wrapped in each other's arms, and let the peace of the moment wash over them. The ranch spread out before them, a testament to what could be built through hard work and determination and love. In the house behind them, their children slept safely, dreaming their own dreams of the future. And above them, the Nevada sky stretched endless and beautiful, full of stars. "Thank you," Lydia whispered. "For what?" "For looking at me that first day and seeing me. Really seeing me. For saying I was beautiful when I had forgotten what that felt like. For giving me this life." Pierce kissed her temple, his lips brushing against the scars with reverence. "Thank you for being brave enough to take a chance on a lonely rancher, for building this life with me. For being exactly who you are." They remained on the porch until the moon was high overhead, talking quietly about nothing and everything, comfortable in the silence between words. Eventually, the cold drove them inside, and they banked the fire and made their way to their bedroom. As they lay together in the darkness, Lydia thought about how far she had come. From the terrified, scarred woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Belmont, to the confident, loved woman she was now. The journey had not always been easy, but it had been worth every struggle, every moment of doubt, every challenge overcome. "Pierce," she said softly into the darkness. "Yes, I would do it all again, every single moment, just to end up here with you." His arms tightened around her. "So would I, my love. So would I." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's embrace, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would endure. The scars that had once seemed like marks of tragedy had become simply part of their story, proof that beauty and love could be found even in the aftermath of loss. The ranch would continue for generations. passing from their children to their grandchildren and beyond. The land would change hands but never leave the family, and the story of how it all began would be told and retold. The tale of a mail-order bride who arrived with scars and a cowboy who saw beyond them to the beautiful soul within. A story of love found in unexpected places, of lives rebuilt from ashes, of the power of truly seeing another person. But that was for the future. For now, there was only this moment, this perfect peace, this deep and abiding love. And it was more than enough. It was everything.